quick warning. The first story today does contain some disturbing subject matter and viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. Hey Raven, all of your recent nature and outdoor videos made me want to share something that I experienced with my boyfriend at the time. He's now my ex. This happened back in the early 2000s, so forgive me if I'm missing some pieces. So, my ex, we'll call him Keith, and I were planning a small road trip. At night, we planned to stop at places that we could either sleep in my car, because I had a Jeep, or in a tent. That way we saved money on hotels. To be honest, the trip itself started out fine. We were far from professional when it came to camping, which we proved every time that we'd struggled to put up the tent. We got better towards the end, as it just became a routine for us, and I may have kept certain rods together, but it all worked out in the end. There was a campsite that he specifically wanted to check out. It had a really big lake, and you could bring your own boat, or even rent a small fishing or paddle boat. I thought that the idea sounded fun at the time. As we arrived at the campground, it became evident that this place was not the same place that we saw in the pictures and reviews. The booth where you buy a parking ticket was replaced by a rundown automated machine. As Keith fidgeted to get the machine to work, I looked around and noticed just how neglected this place had become. The road was cracked in many places, there were overgrown vines hugging the signs, and there was no sign of others in the entrance. And even though I was seeing a whole lot of nothing, something was definitely feeling off. Once Keith finally got the machine to work, we went through the gate, driving through to find a good spot to stay. Good news, as we drove up the path, we finally came across some people. Bad news, they did not make me feel better about the situation. We were driving very slowly as we discussed where we wanted to set up camp, and drove past a woman. We both looked over at her, but I watched her as her head moved, following us all the way up the road and around the curve. She looked like she was trying to intimidate us, like we would have probably been in trouble if we stopped there by her. As Keith kept driving, I explained how creeped out that she made me. He laughed at my statement, teasing me for being scared of some old woman. I really didn't think she was that old, and it wasn't that I was afraid of her, it was her stance. The way she watched us as we drove by, like she was threatening us with her eyes. I don't know how to explain it. Basically, he reassured me that it was probably just someone being nosy or mad, thinking they would have to share the area with some strangers. I let it go as he said he wanted to go further in anyways, and possibly get closer to the boat docks. We followed some signs to the lake, and that's when we learned that the building where you would get a rental was all locked up. We couldn't tell if it was permanent, or if there just wasn't anyone available at the time, so we instead tried to find a place for us to stay. Thankfully, there was a plot nearby with no one else in the area that we quickly claimed a stake on. We set up our tent and even cooked some brats on a nearby grill. While we were cooking, we saw a van slowly drive by us, and when they got to our plot, they slowed down to a crawl. They had their windows down and we could easily see two bald guys up front. The one in the passenger side was nearly hanging out the window looking at us and smiling. Keith, being the genius he was, just greeted them and without responding they kept on going up the path, until we could no longer see them. It put me on edge, making me feel like we were being watched like zoo animals. I remembered asking Keith why he reacted that way, and he said that he was just trying to show them that he wasn't afraid or intimidated by them. Maybe it's just me, but I would have rather have stayed in the background instead of drawing attention to us. Again, I was a little uncomfortable, but I did my best to let it go and try to have fun still. After eating, we walked over to the docks to check out the water, even though we didn't have a boat. We took our shoes off and went in the water up to our knees. We reached in and pulled out a few rocks and shells that looked pretty cool, so we took them back to our tent. Despite the eerie atmosphere in the beginning, it was actually turning out to be a pretty good time. That was until we went to bed. We were already in the tent and asleep at this point, when we were jolted awake by a loud, horrifying sound that echoed through the campground. It sounded like something metal being scraped along concrete. This time, I wasn't the only one startled by the sound. Keith was sitting up, bug-eyed, looking just as scared. I whispered to him, "What the hell is that?" I don't know if he was trying to fake it or if he really didn't care, but he rubbed his face as he quietly said, "I don't know, it's probably just a deer." I don't know of any deer that sounds like that, or what part of the deer that sound could even be coming from. I pointed this out to him, obviously irritated, and so he changed his assumption, saying it was probably just some rowdy and inconsiderate campers. As I continued to listen, I could at least agree with him that it was probably a person and maybe they were purposely doing it to scare us. We stayed sitting upright, listening until the sound finally stopped, and we didn't hear it again. Keith sighed, thankfully saying that it was over, so that we should go back to sleep, and then he quickly laid back down. I tried to lay back down myself and fall asleep, but at that point, I was fully awake. I don't know how long it took, but I finally did start drifting off, focusing on all the sounds around me. That was until I started hearing more noises. This time, it sounded like whispering. I laid still trying to listen, hoping that I could make out what was being said. I never could, but it still freaked me out, so I woke up Keith. I told him that someone was by our tent, and he said something half awake about it being the wind. I argued with him that I knew the difference, and that I needed him to go with me, as I was too afraid to check alone. He told me to take his knife in his bag, and he refused to get up. Helpful. I grabbed the knife and a flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent, sticking my head out. I didn't immediately see anyone around, so I stepped out and walked over to our once smoldering fire. My stomach dropped. There were beer bottles all around. Neither of us brought beer because we didn't drink. And then I saw the two headless carcasses. I think that they were rabbits, but it was hard to tell. Obviously, I was mentally screaming and freaking out. Someone had obviously been there so close to our tent while we were vulnerable and sleeping. I was thankful that we were okay and that we kept everything either in our tent or car, so nothing was taken, at least by my initial scan. Our car was still there. I calmly but quickly went back to the tent and I shook Keith awake. I told him what I saw and he still didn't seem worried about it, saying people were obviously trying to scare us. So, I lied. I told him that I saw someone run into the trees. This made him finally get up, but he still didn't look nearly as terrified as I was. Maybe he actually was, and was just good at hiding it. But I doubted it. We'd been together for 3 years, and I could easily read him. He walked out, and when he saw the animals, he started gagging. I finally got him to see my side of things, and we agreed to leave. We quickly packed up, and threw the barely collapsed tent in the back, carefully driving away. We did a quick once-over of the Jeep to make sure that there wasn't anything suspicious or dangerous. I kept getting that feeling like we were being watched, so I kept looking out all of the windows and mirrors as he drove. But of course, the creepiness couldn't end there. As we approached the entrance, waiting to turn out, I saw a figure standing by the campground maps. He was holding something. Something that looked like a bat or a baton. Once we were finally out of there, I breathed a sigh of relief and told Keith what I saw and how absolutely backwoods scary movie everything we witnessed was. I could tell that he was concerned too, but he said that it wasn't as bad as I was making it out to be, instantly putting me in a worse mood. We found a hotel a few miles away and slept in my car in their parking lot right under a light. I was finally able to sleep behind a locked door and felt much better. The rest of the trip was nothing like that, thankfully. Keith and I are no longer together, but we are okay friends. I've brought it up a few times around him and he still plays it off like I was overreacting. No wonder we didn't work out. I haven't gone camping since, and yes, that experience is definitely part of the reason. It causes a bit of a panic attack for me to think about it, but I know that I need to move on and possibly try again. I still don't even know if those people were really just messing with us, wanting to scare us, or just being jerks. But there's still the possibility that they were planning something more sinister. I'm sure if I go with someone who trusts me more, it'll be a much better time, but until then, I'll just be staying in a hotel. In 2018, my girlfriend and I planned a fun and romantic camping/road trip. We actually met on a group hiking trip that we both ended up on, so hiking and camping had always had a special meaning to us. This trip would be just as important. I was planning on proposing to her. I talked to my dad about it because I wanted to go to the same park/campsite that he had taken me to as a kid, and he gave me directions and reminded me of the name of the place. I remembered how fun and peaceful it was, and I knew that I wanted to propose to Hayley there. So, we laid out our plans with that campground being our first stop. I told Hayley it was a good memory from my childhood and that I wanted to visit it. She understood and agreed, being none the wiser. The day of our trip came, and we set out early to beat the traffic. We lived out of state and the trip was going to end back up in our home state, hopefully being able to share the good news with both of our families, and then we would just have the drive back home. We only had one thing planned for our return drive, so it was going to be a more relaxed and unscheduled drive. Anyways, the trip started off great. We visited a national park, climbed some rock walls, and rode horses. We tried a few local diners and met some pretty cool people along the way. Then it was the day for us to drive to the park where my plans were really going to take place. What I didn't account for was the thunderstorm that would be happening on our way there. Camping would not be an issue for us. We prepared by bringing some waterproofing stuff, knowing that's the nature of our home state, but you can never really account for how others will react in stormy weather. Everyone was driving either way too slow or way too fast, and they would splash water at us, almost making us hydroplane at times. There were multiple accidents on the shoulders, and traffic was being redirected so much that it was just becoming a mess. We ended up getting off the highway and, for the most part, having better luck on back roads. It was getting pretty late, but we finally arrived at the park, and it had stopped raining. We'd stopped somewhere close by for food, neither of us wanting to make anything that night, so we got there on a full stomach, ready to set up our tent. We ended up just chilling in our tent that night, talking and reading until we both fell asleep. When the morning came, I woke up before Hayley and started making us breakfast. After she woke up and we ate, we took some time to relax and prepare for our hike that day. When we set off, she was expecting to see new trails and hear stories from my childhood, I'm sure. I, on the other hand, was on a mission to find the perfect spot to propose. As the day was reaching its end, we made our way back to our camp to have dinner and again relax for the night. I made sure to find a spot for us that was a bit more secluded so that no one else was around. But nothing was sacrificed for our privacy, as the sight was still beautiful. Being surrounded by the tall trees, that night was honestly perfect. We had a fire going. It was actually a bit chilly as the storm had dropped the temperatures drastically. Hayley stayed close by as we talked and listened to the crickets chirping and the occasional owl hooting, and the rustling of the leaves in that same cool breeze. We relished in each other's company, and I knew that this would be perfect. I went to grab the small box from my bag in our tent, claiming that I needed something, but as I came out, I noticed a few things. The first thing was the confused look on Hayley's face. I cocked my head to the side, about to ask her what was wrong, when she made a motion with her hands to listen. I didn't hear anything. She said that was the problem. The park had fallen eerily silent. There wasn't a single chirp, hoot, or even the sound of leaves and wind. It was as if nature itself had paused. At first we tried to play it off as things being weird, but animals and insects can sense things, and maybe they could sense a threat. It could have easily been something bigger than them in the area. I didn't personally feel unsafe at this point, as we had ways to protect ourselves, such as bear mace. But the feeling I couldn't shake was the feeling of being watched by some unknown presence. I asked Hayley about it, and she agreed, saying that something definitely didn't feel right. We both started looking around to see if we could spot someone or something, and it finally caught my eye. Across from our little setup, across from the trail, I could see the shadow of a figure in the trees. I didn't want to startle them and cause them to come running out towards me, so I calmly asked Hayley if she saw it too, and she nodded. I continued to stare at it, trying to figure out the best course of action. I still had the mace on me, so I pulled it off my clip and I held it as I kind of greeted the shadow. I know it sounds dumb, but I didn't know what else to do. When they didn't budge, I walked a little closer to it, hoping to make out what it was that I was seeing. I still couldn't make out any details, but I could tell that the shadow was very short. It looked like something that was on all fours, so it had to be some kind of animal, I thought. With this in mind, I thought that I could just scare it off. Simple enough. My first attempt was to be as big and loud as possible, so I shouted and waved my arms. Now, all I saw up to this point was the dark figure. What I saw after I started shouting was the glowing eyes that were now looking in our direction. There was no light reaching that thing from our side, so how were the eyes glowing? Now getting a little unnerved, I wanted to try harder to get them to leave, so I picked up a large nearby rock and chucked it at the thing. I started screaming again, walking a little more towards it, but keeping my car as separating us. You could tell the thing's eyes shifted downward, but then right back up towards me. This thing was not scared, but I was certainly getting there. I was just about to direct Hayley into the car, unsure of what this thing was and how dangerous it could be. I just knew that I would feel safer with us behind a metal barrier. As I turned to direct her to get in, I started getting this overwhelming feeling of dread, and I became horribly nauseous. Hayley noticed, and she came to my side asking me what was wrong. I told her that whatever that thing is, it was not safe, and told her to get into the car. She quickly got in, and without turning my back to that thing, I got in the driver's side and locked the doors. Knowing we were safe, I wanted to try to shine some light on this thing and figure out what it was. It was late enough that I didn't expect anyone to be coming up the path, so I thought I would try to do a sort of K-turn to face my headlights at this thing. However, as soon as I started my car, the thing started moving. We both froze as we watched to see where it would go, but watching this thing only gave us more unanswered questions, and creeped us out even more. We watched as it walked between the trees, heading down towards the way that my car was pointing. We caught glimpses of it as the moonlight hit it, and I was shocked by what we saw. It looked like a kid. It was walking on two legs, but was very short and small in stature. It had on either a hospital gown or maybe some old-looking dress, and it had long, unkempt, dark hair. The part that took this back from shocking to unsettling was the way that they were walking. It looked wholly unnatural. The movements were jagged and hard, almost like they didn't understand how knees worked or how to walk. It looked absolutely terrifying. I could tell that it scared Hayley too, as I noticed her hand tightly gripping my arm. We continued to watch as it walked through the trees and down to the other side of the hill until it was completely out of view. Once we couldn't see it anymore, the overwhelming presence and sickness feeling let up, and I felt like myself again, as well as relieved. We both agreed to sleep in the car instead, but we still needed to put out the fire. I agreed to do it alone, but she demanded to go with me. When we got out of the car, the sound we once heard had come back. The breeze was there, and the crickets were right back at it too. I really feel like they knew something wasn't right either. The next morning, everything was back to normal. There was nothing weird going on, and we both felt fine. We briefly recounted what we saw that night, and definitely agreed that in case it was an actual child, we should at least report it. We weren't planning on staying another night, so we packed up and drove to the front to tell a ranger what we saw that night. He seemed skeptical, but after showing him the area, he said he would look into it. Maybe I could have done more that night, but at the same time, that feeling was telling me not to approach it. I don't know what we witnessed that night, but I had never seen anything like it, and I hope that I never do again. Oh, and in case anyone is interested, we stopped at a cute little man-made waterfall that a lot of people took photos at. It was part of that particular city's charm, and since my plans were a little skewed, that's where I proposed. And she said yes, so overall, still worth it. This happened to me and some friends back when we took a girls' camping trip in 2013. It was a much-needed escape from our hectic lives at the time, filled with failed relationships, demanding jobs, and college stress. There were 6 of us total, and we were determined to have a blast together in the great outdoors. We had plans for a fire, some light drinking, swimming, and whatever else piqued our interest that weekend. We found a great campground a few hours out of state. It seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, which kind of put some of us off to it, but after looking at the reviews more, it seemed like a pretty popular place, so we went to it. We all met up and squeezed into Dawn's SUV, preparing for a nice drive to our destination. When we arrived, there were already a few cars in the parking lot, so, again, it reassured us that at least other people were there. We wanted to hike through the grounds to find our spot, so we left the car in the parking lot. We only had 3 tents, and it didn't take much, so it was an easy hike around. Not to mention, this was in late spring, and it wasn't a very steep climb, so it was actually quite a pleasant walk. We got to one campground that would have been fine, but as we started plotting it out and talking about it, the people in the nearby tents came back. The area was big enough for multiple tents, but the other occupants were 2 older couples, and they didn't look too happy with the idea of sharing the area with us. They were staring at us and looking pretty annoyed, so we decided to just keep walking. We didn't want people complaining and ruining our fun, so it was best to find a place just for us, or with people closer to our age. Thankfully, it didn't take long to find one. We weren't entirely sure at the time if it was an actual plot for camping, but it was open and flat, and off the trails, so we figured that it would be okay. We set up our tents, started a fire, and we were ready to start our much-anticipated camping party. The first night we stayed near our tents, talking, drinking. The days and nights after were filled with even more laughter, bonding, and some pretty wild activities. We all started drinking pretty heavily, and, as it normally goes, we started doing some pretty stupid things. Val tried to climb one of the trees, and Jenna was really wanting to swim. The lake was pretty close by, so we all went for a late night swim, hoping that it would distract Val from trying to climb too. Once we got to the water, Jenna stripped down and jumped in, which caused a chain of reaction of everyone else following suit. It was pretty dark, and from what we could tell, we were alone. None of us felt scared, or like we were being watched, so we just enjoyed being carefree in the moment. Things got a little more intense, though, when one of my friends got out first, put her clothes back on, and then grabbed the rest of our clothes, making us all have to get out and run back, wearing just about nothing. It was all in fun, though. Nobody was mad, and we were all still having a great time, not thinking about any of our responsibilities. At that moment, everything seemed perfect, and we thought that our worries were left far behind us at home. It wasn't until later that night, when we were all asleep, that things started to take a creepy turn. I woke up in the middle of the night for some reason. Maybe I was just adjusting or something of the sort, but I started to hear a weird sound. It was a click, followed by a grinding or winding sound. I heard this pattern 3 or 4 times before I finally sat up in my tent. It didn't sound natural, and I was afraid to go there by myself, so I woke up Summer, who was sleeping in the tent with me. I told her to listen for the sound, but of course it didn't happen again. She was still pretty groggy, so she fell back asleep, but I was too invested at this point. I got out of the tent to look around, but instead of the clicking sound, I heard footsteps. I was startled at first, trying to find the source of the sound, when I saw Dawn running from out of the trees. The look on her face told me everything. She looked just as frightened. She said that she had needed to use the restroom, but she started feeling like she was being watched. So she quickly finished up, but then she started hearing footsteps. Footsteps that sounded like they were fast, like the person was running. This scared her enough to run back to our tents. We both sat awake for some time discussing what we had heard, and I brought up the clicking sound that I'd heard. She said that she heard it too when she was back in the trees. When we ran out of ideas and the area was void of any weird sounds, we told each other that we should try to get some more sleep since we would be driving back the next morning. The next morning, the strange incident was pretty much forgotten about, and we continued to enjoy our adventure. We made a quick breakfast and some instant coffee and agreed to pack up so that we could take our stuff with us through the rest of the trail, expecting to just leave afterwards. As we started packing up, Summer pointed out a disposable camera that was on the ground. The only thing that struck us as odd at the time was that it was on the ground. Nikki was a photographer, she was going to school for it, and had already set her foot in the photography field. However, Nikki preferred disposable cameras. She said that she liked the older look of the pictures, and she also developed them herself at her school. We all just assumed it was one of hers, handing it to her, and she agreed that it probably was hers as it was the same brand. She didn't know how it got outside, because she had several of them with her, but they were all in her bag, in her tent. We just joked about us being pretty messed up that night and left it at that. We packed up and finished our trip out of there and home, with nothing else significant happening. A few weeks later, we were all back home continuing with our normal crazy lives. We started a group chat for the 6 of us when we planned our trip and decided to keep it going. It was a great way for all of us to stay connected. Then Nikki came into the chat and started asking who was taking photos of us sleeping. No one confessed to it. That's when she started becoming a bit more hysterical. She was talking about how she was developing the film looking at the photos when she noticed certain things weren't adding up. She would be absent in a lot of the photos as she was the one taking them, but there were times where she would hold it out to be in the photo too, or one of us would take it instead. But there was never a situation while we were camping that all of us could have been in the picture fully. I think some of us were still in denial, me included, and trying to come up with some kind of explanation. So, a few of us got together to look at them. I couldn't deny it anymore. As we went through the photos, there were far too many of us in candid moments. There were a few from us around the fire, but it got creepier when we saw the photos of us at the lake, swimming. There was one of me running out of the water with nothing on. It was from a distance at the side, which was terrifying, because that would mean they were closer to the trees and trail going the opposite way of our campsite, which means the likelihood of it being one of my friends was slim. There would be no reason for us to go that way, especially when most of us didn't even have clothes on. And the worst ones we saw were the dark pictures of our tent. Then, it looked like the person holding the camera stuck their hand in the tent and snapped the photo of us. The camera was above us, angled down into the tent, and there were pictures of all of us sleeping. That's when it finally made sense to me as to what I was hearing that night. The clicking was the camera shutter button, and the winding was the winding from the camera. I woke up at some point while there was someone out there taking photos of us. And then Dawn said she also heard someone in the trees. We started piecing things together. Someone must have gone through our stuff at some point while we were walking around, and stole one of Nikki's cameras. It had to be at that point because it had pictures of us around the fire, at the lake, and sleeping. But I'm guessing me waking up and talking to Summer must have spooked them off, and they bolted. I'm assuming they meant to keep the camera, but dropped it. We were all thoroughly freaked out at this point. Knowing someone was close enough to take these pictures, we were all in vulnerable positions, and anything could have happened. But I'm thankful that they at least didn't have the courage to do anything else. Nikki said that she was still glad we found the camera, so that we knew someone didn't keep naked and sleeping pictures of us. But just knowing that it happened, it was still plenty enough to freak us all out. Everyone wanted her to get rid of the pictures, not wanting to remember that, but she did confide in me that she kept the ones of herself. The whole situation still creeps me out, but I do my best not to dwell on it. There wasn't really anything we could do about it anyways, so we just agreed that we wouldn't ever return to those campgrounds, And I hope that I never find creepy pictures like that of me again. So that, my friends, was a collection of some creepy camping stories. That's all I have to say about it. Creepy camping stories. Camping stories that are creepy. I hope you all enjoy these stories. I know I do. I'm not much a camping person myself. I mentioned back in the last camping video that I went camping once when I was a kid. Other than that, I think the closest to camping I did one time was when Patience and I did a road trip. We slept in her car for one of the nights. It wasn't bad. It was hot. I remember that much. It was not easy to actually sleep because it was late summer, I believe. I'm trying to remember. Maybe it was early summer. I don't know. Where we were, though, was not cooled off in any way, shape, or form, and sleeping in the car was not comfortable. But we did it that night. I think we did it once or twice. She had a PT Cruiser at the time, and that's what we were driving. We took the back seats out, and that was the bed area, just the entire back area. Again, not very comfortable, but we tried. Nothing terrifying like this, like these stories, thankfully. The one camping trip I did with my friend way back. Ticks. I guess that was the scary story for back then. Just ticks. Which, yeah, they're pretty scary. Anyways, friends, I hope you all enjoyed these stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing if you enjoyed what you heard and want more content like this. You can also leave me a comment down below letting me know how you're enjoying the video a day that's going on. I don't normally talk numbers. I do sometimes, but based on the numbers, y'all aren't enjoying these videos a day. I don't know how it's going to end up with me doing a video a day, more content, and getting fewer views than if I was doing 3 a week. I don't know how that's working, but it is. I don't know, YouTube did some weird, stupid algorithmic shift, and everything is all upside down and broken. I don't know. Whatever. Anyways, I know you guys are enjoying it, and that's what matters. That's what matters to me, too. So, you can also join Patreon and memberships to get early access to content like this, depending on how you sign up, where you sign up, what you sign up for, and get extra stuff as well. There's also the super thanks, where you can just do a quick support of the channel. I can't give anything special for it, but if I could, I would. I will, however, comment on your super thanks message, saying that I really appreciate it, because I do. Yeah. All that said, friends, I do hope that I see you again here very soon, but until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you're the best you that you can be. Don't forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until next time, much love, and sleep well.